Hello, my name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Every other Tuesday, I invite fascinating people from around the world to share experiences and knowledge that will help us create affordable, equitable, and sustainable cities. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, where as commissioner I led the design and construction of over 200 parks and took a small program called Ciclovia, Open Streets, and increased it to over 120 kilometers, 75 miles of car-free streets every Sunday and holiday, where more than 1 million people walk, bike, run, shop, enjoying the presence of each other. 17 years ago, I created 880 Cities, a non-profit organization based in Toronto, Canada, where I live. Last year, I ran for mayor and came second with 100,000 votes. My aim was to change the conversation in creating a Toronto for everyone. I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities in all continents, sharing and learning. Based on all experiences, I develop master classes and keynotes customized to each city. But Cities for Everyone, the webinar, is a way of giving back. It's always free and hopefully always interesting. Please invite others to join us every other Tuesday, anyone who cares about cities and people, equity and sustainability, about all living older, healthier, and happier. Hello, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are around the world. My name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Today, we have a very special guest, Mayor Edion Velia from Tirana, Albania. And he's going to be speaking on a fascinating topic. A good city for children and youth will be a city for everyone. And this is not about theory. This is about practice. The first time that I met Arion, and then later on we became good friends, was about 8 years ago when he was starting his first period, a time when Tirana was completely different. There was not even a single meter of protected bike lanes. There was nothing like open streets or playgrounds or daycares, it has gone through an enormous transformation. So here is Mayor Edion Velia, who's going to be talking about Tirana's transformation. He once said that people used to think of Tirana, capital of Albania, as the North Korea of Europe. Now, it's totally different. Mayor Edion Velia, how are you?
Life is good. Good to see you, Gil.
Wonderful. Mayor Velia today is in New York. In some weeks, I think he's going to come to Toronto, hopefully. But thank you for coming. By the way, this is the only person that has repeated sessions. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Gil. I'm here in New York. It's UN week, and there's a few. Finally, the UN has gotten its act together, and it's including cities in a lot of the conversations. And I think what a lot of leaders have understood that you can have ministers and governments sign the COP 23 and 24 and 25 and 26 and 20 something. But in the end of the day, it's going to be a mayor who plants the trees, who mitigates the floods, who mitigates climate change, who includes citizens in democracy, whether they're 8 or 80. So in that regard, I'm also happy that at the global level, there's now an understanding that cities, the bucket of responsibility stops with mayors. So I'm delighted we've come to this day and age.
Wonderful. So thank you. And also one of the things that I want the hundreds of people connected to get is that it's not about the money. It's not a technical issue. The things, that's why I love taking study trips to Copenhagen or places. Now I got to take them to Tirana so that people will say, oh, it's not rocket science. No, it's not. But it does take vision, it takes action, and it takes guts. And those are three elements that Arion has. He has a great passion and perseverance. So thank you very much.
I became mayor 8 years ago, and I just got re-elected for my third and last mandate. The way it works in Albania, you can do 3 mandates, 4 year each, which I think it's enough. It's enough to get your vision through. but it's also not a very long time to make you complacent and to make you feel like you have an eternity to make some of the changes. Now, when it comes to working with children, it is it's quite a debate, because so many people say in our line of work that you have to think of voters and taxpayers, because in the end of the day, you are a mayor, or you are a politician, or you hold a public service because someone votes for you, and you can get stuff done because people pay taxes. But that automatically is a flawed reasoning, because it means that the only people that are your constituency are people 18 and above. Because if you only think of voters and taxpayers, you're only thinking about adults who have their name on the voting list and their name on the pay sheet of the tax authorities. And I think it's a flawed mistake, because automatically excludes, particularly in young societies like ours, excludes a good 30% of the population, which is under that particular age. Now, also what I've realized is that, people are very cynical. Now it's like the new international sport. We all have our national sports, and you guys do more baseball and American football. We do more soccer. But I think the international sport is cynicism. It's just to say that things cannot be done, and this is not how you do it, and the naysayers. But you can be suspicious of a politician, myself included, but you can never be suspicious of your own child. So I don't know anyone in this webinar who says, look, I really have doubts that my child is up to a big conspiracy. So you can say that you can even believe that the earth is flat, which is stupid, but anyway, you can believe that the vaccine has a chip on it. But you can never believe that your child is up to a conspiracy. So I think including children has been such a great tactic, also to convince naysayers or cynical parents or people who just don't want to deal with politics, because children are absolute genuine advocates for change, and I think they are the most trustworthy communicator when it comes to even their families. So Gil, we met exactly 8 years ago, and I think we took these pictures either right before you arrived or shortly thereafter. But this was the view of the city in our early days. Now, Albania was a communist country. So until 1992, when pluralism happened after the Berlin Wall, no one owned any cars. I remember the city had maybe 17 cars. Now it has 170,000 cars. At the time, it was only the army and the Politburo. So to see a car go through the city was an event. And many of us young kids, we trained to run after a pickup and get a little ride on a car, because it was such an event. Now the automobile, in a city that used to be a 15-minute city, everybody on bike, on bus, or walking, now became a trophy. So you left communist Albania, which was the North Korea of Europe, full of bunkers and a paranoid psychopathic dictatorship. But now you are free, so you can go to Italy, get a Fiat, and go to France and get a Renault, and go to Germany and get a Mercedes, and bring it home, mostly because it's the same city, but mostly to show your neighbor that you got a trophy of capitalism. You're not a poor communist anymore. You made it in life. And I think this trophy, but unlike a bracelet or a necklace you can wear on yourself and doesn't take much space, a car takes a lot of space. And you could see that, even in these very early days after communism, really poor families or really, poor conditions, poor homes, but a nice Mercedes was parked outside, mostly to show this trophy of capitalism. And on demographic, this is what the city looked on my first day of work. This is a picture that we took that first day. It almost looked like a bidonville, favela that, absolutely no sense of order. Communism collapsed. 250,000 people were accommodating now 1 million people. So this is like having 4 times your family members come over for lunch overnight. The city grows at the rate of 25,000 people a year. So together with Oslo, they're the fastest growing cities in Europe, almost 3% of our own body weight, demographically speaking. Now, 25,000 people mean roughly 8,000 new apartments. So we have absolutely no time or patience for NIMBYism. Not in my backyard, no more building. People are coming, and you have 2 choices. Either you let them sleep rough, and you have a crisis like here in New York, where 68,000 people in the richest city in the world are sleeping rough, and what you see, the scenes in San Francisco and some American towns, or you keep up the pace of growth with the pace of planning and the pace of urban transformation. Now, the question is, what are kids doing? What do they do? Where do they play? Well, you know, this is the early pictures, mostly in small spaces in between cars, because even the courtyards in the apartment blocks are occupied by cars, because the automobile needs to have a revered status. You know, if you ask people what is the most important thing in your life, you know, people say, of course, my family, my children. But then you see, well, what do you know, if the kids are the most important thing, where do they play? Well, in whatever space the cars have left in between. So then we said, well, look, you know, if kids play in these places, you know, where do they go in kindergarten? So we started in our first year taking a look at what our kindergartens look like. They look worse than prisons, because we had applied to join the European Union. There was such an emphasis on justice system. So our prisons are state of the art, but our kindergartens look worse than the prisons. You know, in an Albanian prison, you have digital cable, you know, all the facilities, you have a library, you have internet. But then the kindergartens were all occupied, mostly by people building garages and taking over during the 90s, when, you know, no one was really speaking for state property or public property, because it was seen the state as sort of the communist party. So whatever belonged to the state needs to be vandalized and destroyed, because it reminded us of the past. Now, how did we come to this, and how did we make sort of huge pedestrian zones, the largest car-free downtown? Well, it started very small. It started first, you know, we organized, when you came to visit, sort of the early one day without cars. Now, if you tell the public, they say, we're going to turn all of downtown car-free, where people were used to literally driving through, that's pretty dramatic. And it didn't work even in the previous time, with several mayors who really tried to do the right thing. So we said, well, look, let's give people a taste of what it would look like, to be on a bike, what it would look like to have oxygen, what it would look like to really treat this like a family event, rather than the mayor, the big boss, politics deciding this. Now, in the very beginning, it was a major failure. You know, we were the people in traffic were mad. I was getting the middle finger all the time. But then a lot of these children were going home. And as the parents were complaining about traffic downtown, they were saying, well, look, Dad, you know, remember that blue bike that you bought me 3 years ago? I never used it until now that the mayor had sort of this car-free day. So we started doing once a month, and then once a week, and then on the weekends, until sort of it became a permanent fixture. So it was digestible for people to understand, and also get a flavor of how it felt to connect to family. And instead of, you know, as you rightly say, our human nature, we've only been in cars for the last 100 years. But for 1,000,000 years, you know, just like birds fly and fish swim, we've been walking and running and hunting and gathering. So in that regard, it was a call back to nature, but done in incremental, you know, and of course we didn't take forever, but within a year, we did so many of these events that these kids then became top advocates. Not the media, not the politicians, not the speeches, but children going home and reporting on how it was done. And then the same thing with, you know, in that jungle of concrete, you know, how do you argue for more trees? And again, you said we're a poor country. We're not a rich place. So we said, how do we plant 2 million trees by 2030? And we said, well, one way is to crowdsource. So why don't we ask the same kids that won the battles for the transformation of the city space also to plant a tree for their birthday? Because, you know, if we have 170,000 children going, or 60,000 children going to elementary and high school, and, you know, they have 160,000 birthdays. Now, maybe not all of them, but it really becomes a competition, because they say, oh, you know, but Dennis, he planted a tree for his birthday, and Sarah planted a tree for her birthday. So I want to plant a tree because the mayor now has these GPS locations, and you have a menu of trees of what you can afford. Some are €5, some are 500 euros. It depends on what the family can afford from the list of trees that grows in the Mediterranean. Then we started this wonderful competition of kids, you know, planting trees for their birthdays. We already passed our 1 million mark, and we're well ahead to go to 2 million by 2030. Now, playgrounds are such an important part of this. You know, when we came to City Hall, and with Gil, we were doing a little screening of our assets, and we found on the list of playgrounds, the number was 0. And, you know, because we grown-ups, we have so many important things to do, and apparently playgrounds are not an important thing to do because it's children's stuff. And then we realized that one of the reasons Tirana now is one of the safest cities in Europe is because we decided to build one playground every month. And I'm here in New York, where Jane Jacobs used to say, eyes on the street are the best CCTV camera. You know, grandmothers and grandfathers who take their children to playgrounds, they make such a huge difference. And they are the people that not only spend quality time with kids, but, you know, they provide constant life in the streets. It's very difficult to steal a flat screen TV when a granny is sitting downstairs watching her kids, but also watching who goes in and out. So in that regard, providing life in some of the most dark corners, and it's about lighting, it's about cleaning, but mostly it's about happening, you know, having life happening in those places. And then we started sort of this spree in making our kindergartens state of the art. Now we have a crisis because we became a victim of our own success. We found kindergartens that had 30% occupancy. Now we are at the stage where for a public kindergarten, we have on average 11 applications for one spot. So we can't keep up now with the demand that everybody's moving from you know, private kindergartens or staying at home to going to a kindergarten where play is an important learning element, where gardening and connecting to nature and to animals and to plants is extremely important. Now, this is what traffic looked at first day, and this is what it looks now. So, you know, Albania is blessed with a lot of talent, not only, you know, important people like Mother Teresa, but also current rock stars like Dua Lipa and Rita Ora and Ava Max and Bebe Rexha and all this amazing talent. Well, you know, you couldn't find out because there was no big plaza for them to gather. Replacing this picture with this, you know, so the same square. You know, I remember when we had our first workshop with Gil, we couldn't cross. There was 7 intersections in 100 meters from my office to the hotel where we were doing our training. Now it's the largest. We're proud to say it's the largest pedestrian space in Southeastern Europe, over 100,000 square meters, and for the big square and big concerts, and then a lot more. Food is also very important in the country, but you know, if we took a look of where people were buying their food, because buying food and cooking is such an experience in the Mediterranean, and if it's served in these trashy places, in the mud, by the sewage, with the rats. Now, clearly this experience, because it's a family experience, most people take their kids to go to the market. So also transforming the places where people would go and buy food and including kids in the food spaces. So, you know, have a market, but also have kids painting and drawing and playing and doing a street theater, made it such a family experience. And we used, you know, the religion, because food is a religion in the Mediterranean, the religion of food, and included children and make it a family experience. Was extremely transformative, not only as a place where you go and buy your protein and calories to fill your stomach, but also a place where you feel your heart, you feel your mind, and it's a holistic experience to the act of feeding and nutrition. Now, a lot of emphasis we put on parks, and we talked about this in our previous episode, and why parks are such an important oasis of reflection and of therapy. Now, we live in a crazy, you know, digital chaos. You know, in the old days, Umberto Eco used to say that, you know, every village has an idiot, and if the idiot of the village in the medieval days came from his alley, everybody in the plaza having coffee would turn their back because they didn't want the idiot to join the conversation or influence the table. Well, now the idiot has Facebook. The flat earthers have Instagram, and the people who believe Steve Jobs is controlling the vaccines with a chip, they all have TikTok. So now the village idiot not only can sit on the table, they can dictate the conversation. And you look like an idiot for not responding. So where do people go to take a break from the madness? So we took a look at our parks, and we found out not only they were underused, but they were completely trashed because, you know, they didn't understand that the city needs a ventilation, then the city needs a counseling space. And I think our emphasis on parks in the beginning got a lot of rioting and a lot of protests. The opposition was like, look, we have better fish to fry. This guy's talking about kids and parks and bikes. You know, we want jobs, we want money. And you say, well, look, a dirty, filthy place, a place that excludes children and the elderly, you know, half of the population, clearly is only thinking about the athletic types. We design cities like everybody's 30, doing the Olympics. But the city needs to be open, and parks are one of the most democratic spaces, because everybody's equal. Doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or if you are on Social Security. If you go to the park, you're equal with everyone else. I mean, the grass is not greener for some and less green for others. And I think giving multiple uses, and creating events, whether it's yoga or whether it's children at play, it's extremely important. And our interventions in parks have been taking out kiosks, and something that you, Gil, and Enrique did in Bogota, produce a lot of hysteria for the moment. But I think the question for every leader is, you want to produce hysteria, or you want to produce history? If you want to produce history, you have to survive the hysteria, and you shouldn't blink. And the work with children ultimately answers this question. Are you going to think about the next elections? Or are you going to think about the next generation? I tend to believe, and I have proof, I've been re-elected 3 times, if you think about the next generation, it also pays off for the next election. But if you only think about the next election and trying to reply constantly to the hysterics, to this loud minority in the village that dictates the conversation, and if you chase their agenda, then you lose the next generation. You most likely lose also the next election. So this is the before and the after of a lot of the park interventions. And then animating the city is extremely important. Tirana this year is the European sports capital. Last year we were the European youth capital. These titles mean nothing, but they provide such a great alibi. I mean, we still do what we wanted to do, but because we have these titles and we apply for whatever title, is to find excuses to produce events in the city. So because of the sports capital, any event from judo to taekwondo and marathons and triathlons, whatever, they provide so much experiences because people come from everywhere. It's a family gathering. Of course, for every few people who run, there's about 100 who join them, and they're fans. So I think animating the city is important. So when we created the agency for parks and recreation, people were like, parks, okay, but recreation, what are we, like a fun agency? Yeah, we are a fun agency. Cities should be factories of fun production, meaning providing alibis, excuses, reasons for people to come out and bond and connect. If everybody's in their computer and just yelling slurs on Facebook, then we're sitting on our digital silos and literally intoxicating ourselves with this digital poison. And I think providing as many reasons as possible for people to come out and having a calendar of all kinds of events, from big divas to small street events like Street for Children that we are now doing in our schools, provides a reason for families to come out and play. And I think the joy of, we take playing very seriously. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but the act of play is something that we consider very, very serious business for the city. And then we moved from nurseries and kindergartens and schools. We found out the kids hated schools. They didn't hate learning. They didn't hate their teacher, but they hated going to this prison, because if the school looks like an office building, and an office building looks like a prison, and a prison looks like a kindergarten, then you sort of, from the Soviet days, the idea was that everything is uniform. So there's no differences, but there's no difference not only between people who are supposedly equal, but there's also no differences in institutions. So it felt like these kids were showing up for prison every day and inviting designers, whether talented university students to design or top designers like, Stefano Boeri, who did the vertical forest. Some cities find them intimidating, but we called Stefano and said, look, you are the most famous architect of the day. You do this beautiful vertical forest in Milan. Would you be willing to design a school in Albania? I haven't met yet a architect who has said no to designing a school pro bono. And we went from these prisons to schools that are now state of the art. What happened in 2019, in the middle of in the beginning of our second term, was a major earthquake that destroyed huge swaths of the city. Now, it was very sad in the beginning. We lost people and we lost property. But then we said, well, wait a minute. This crisis is also a fantastic opportunity for us to do some pretty amazing things that we haven't done before. And we used what the earthquake left as a new canvas to draw our 10 or 5 or 7 or 15-minute city, and also build schools that look like community centers in a place that has no space, like you saw in the previous pictures, finding these spaces, or in a place like Albania in 67, banned religion, so no churches and mosques. Schools were almost like the church or like the local mosque, because it was the only place where the community gathered. There was not a state institution, but it was mostly a community center. And I think calling on that tradition where people lost their religious institutions, and the beating heart of the community was the school, and designing them for sports and activities where real estate, not only in Albania, but everywhere, Toronto, I'm sure everywhere where people are following, real estate is getting expensive. So no one has the luxury to close schools at 2 p.m. when hours are done. Our schools are open 24/7, so after 2 p.m. when teaching is done, all the gyms have different associations who are taking over and maximizing the real estate, the space that is called a school, mostly for sports activities, learn the guitar or the piano, or drawing, or an NGO. And I think it's very good use of real estate, but it's also in a place that lost moral institutions. It's now the gravity point and a moral institution of that particular community. Also, revamping places for tourists, and I know all of us have tourist traps, and I will not be shy about it. I think cities now need to harness the power of tourism. The world is almost 10 billion people. So at the rate things are going after COVID, when 1 billion people are traveling, there's a lot of money being spread around cities. So also turning the city into a tourist attraction, and finding spots like the old castles that you can renovate, brings some very, very necessary income for the city, but also gives people a sense of pride to see so many foreigners. This year, Tirana had a city of 1 million people. When I became mayor, we had less than 100,000 tourists a year. Now we're at the stage of, we just passed over 7 million tourists this year. So why do people go to sort of the capital of North Korea of Europe? Well, a lot of it is because of the urban transformation, and also finding little jewels that you clean with very, very little money, that eventually pays off by the hordes of tourists that come and leave income to the city. Now, we are now ranked number 2 in the world after Antalya, the city with the largest jump in tourism numbers. Now, Antalya is explainable because due to the war in Ukraine, Russians can only go to Turkey, and very difficult to get to the European Union. So Antalya has an explanation, but Tirana's only explanation in the boom is the power of transformation. And people wanted to see how a European Pyongyang can turn itself upside down in a short amount of years, and sometimes by crowdsourcing and having people participate in tree planting or community transformations, rather than us hitting the jackpot and paying for everything out of our city's pocket. The same thing with sports facilities. We found our national stadium was mostly, again, a parking lot, surrounded by car washes and car oil changers, and it was a disaster. And transforming it into a beautiful space where you can host activities. And again, we didn't pay a cent for this. We asked the private sector, held a competition, and we said, look, we want a beautiful new stadium with these parameters. And our stadium did not go out of town like American or Canadian stadiums, where they send them out of town and they are empty 6 days a week. It's in the heart of the city, in the same place. And jokingly, we say, look, it's a huge hotel, beautiful bars and restaurants, radio stations, a coding academy, some IT businesses, a lot of shopping, great food, also with a little green patch in the middle where we can play football once a week. And I think transforming some of these stereotypes and some of these entities like stadiums or like public spaces that you only use once a week to 24/7 events proved very successful. So the deal was the private sector builds it and they can rent all the space so they can make money out of that. And the city got a free stadium because of this agreement, because otherwise we couldn't afford 100 million euros on a stadium alone. Now, the beautiful hotel, there's a new Marriott in Tirana, they're already booked until next Christmas, because you can actually see matches from your window. So there's a lot of creative ideas out there that you can do with architects, but also financial mechanisms where the city gets a nice asset, develops the economy of the neighborhood, but also doesn't pay a penny in this type of composition. So it's a win-win between the private sector and the city. Now, I will stop very briefly on this object. This is the Pyramid of Tirana. It was meant as a mausoleum for a psychopathic dictator. He wanted to be like Ho Chi Minh and Lenin and, have his body preserved. But because of problems with electricity in 1985, 1986, we're not very good with refrigeration. So he ended up getting a normal burial because the pyramid for our pharaoh could not be done in time. So they did it towards the end of communism. It was NATO headquarters during the Yugoslav wars. It was a big disco called the Mummy, ironically, the Mummy and the Pharaoh and the and the pyramids. And then it just became like one slide of a deteriorated, dilapidated building. So all of us tore our jeans trying to use this slide in a place that had no playgrounds, and the only playground was this slide of the pyramid. Then we said, well, wait a minute, this is the most important real estate in the city. It's between the prime minister's office and the mayor's. And we know it's a taboo because it was a dictator's haunted house, sort to say. But if we say that kids are important, we got to put our money where our mouth is. So if this is the most important real estate in the city, and the prime minister and the mayor have made a point that kids are extremely important to us, why don't we give them the most important real estate in the city? So now the Pyramid of Tirana is transformed. This is not renders. This is the true picture, into the largest coding academy for teenagers, 12 to 18, where they can do augmented reality, when they do virtual reality, where they can do gaming, when they can. So the main concept is called the Tumo Center. It's a concept that is now spreading in a lot of cities, but it's also about jobs of the future. Having kids play is important, but the question for me now in my third mandate is, well, what happens after play? Will our kids, do the same jobs like our parents? I mean, with all due respect for people who need shirts and shoes, but the Center for International Development out of Harvard, they did this Atlas of Economic Complexity for Tirana in 2015. 25% of our economy was shoes, and the other 25% was shirts. Now, my mom worked in that industry, but it pays 250 euros a month. So it's a joke. It's like a minimum wage, and it's dirt cheap. And with all due respect, but there will always be someone in further east where there's populations of hundreds of millions and billions who can make them cheaper, will probably make them cheaper, and they are not jobs that are sustainable or will be with us for the long time. So making this shift in 2022, Ricardo Hausmann for the Center for International Development at Harvard did this again, the same study of the Atlas of Economic Complexity. So a city that was making shoes and shirts, 25% each, half of the economy, is now a city with 25% ICT and 25% tourism. So two mediocre aspects of our economy in 2015 are our mainstay. So the city now lives out of IT, the IT sector, and tourism, which was unheard of, only a few years ago. So we gave the most important piece of real estate, and the pyramid will officially be open next month. Chancellor Scholz from Germany, President Macron from France, a bunch of world leaders are coming for the Berlin process, which is a summit that Tirana is hosting, and everybody unanimously and metaphorically wanted to have the opening at the pyramid. So we're opening next month, and I will be betting now to say that this will be an award-winning venture. Again, we invited some leading MVRDV, a leading Dutch firm, to help us reconceptualize a symbol for psychopathic dictatorship worshipping into a symbol, from a symbol of isolation now to a symbol of extreme opening, and one of the most open societies in Southern Europe. Now, as for the future, we're building a new national theater with Bjarke Ingels, the famous Danish architect. I know he's done some great work here in New York, but also in Canada. And it's amazing that many of these people, because the place sounds so I would say exotic, but so terrifying of the stories of the past, many of these architects find great joy for very little expense, or sometimes for free, to come and use Tirana as an open lab of what you can do with public space. But again, remember, it started with the playgrounds and the kindergartens. Now we can do sort of a lot of these top works, but first you have to win the public, and you have to win this conversation, and you have to keep the narrative that we're building a city for children and the future. and not necessarily a city that glorifies the past, like the story of the pyramid. So this is some of the projects undergoing now. And now, again, we're transforming the economy for the sake of our children. If most of our kids will be into coding and IT, then we have to prepare facilities for that type of future. So this is some of the ongoing works and some of the stuff that we'll be working on this last mandate, which is sort of my legacy for the city, but also I think a testimony for what we believe should be the future. So this is some of the data from the World Tourism Organization. So Albania ranks third for tourism growth, but Tirana is second. And there's also more information online, but it was a delight to be part of this conversation, and I'm really happy, Gil, for the invitation. So if there's any questions before I hit the UN rounds, I'd be very, very happy and wish everybody here best of luck in their endeavors for the cities.
Thank you, Mayor Velia. This is fascinating. You have shown so many cases, so many practices. I hope that people will get this video and send it to their elected officials, city staff, media, friends, advocates, activists, because it shows that how to move from talking to doing, how it is that a city transformation is not a technical issue or a financial issue, but it is a political issue. It's having a vision and action and having the guts, because it's never easy. It's never easy in Tirana or anywhere. And thank you for showing us why the children were so important. Part of it, because if we teach children very, very well, then they go home. And then they teach their parents and their family members and the neighbors and everybody. And if cities are great for children and youth, they are going to be good for everybody. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best on the third and last term as mayor of Tirana. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's not about the gadgets, it's about the people. So I want to thank you, Mayor Velia, for very, very much for this fascinating presentation. If you are thinking of where to go on a vacation, go to Tirana. Any time of the year. It's really nice.
Welcome.
Also, it's next to Greece. When last time I went to Tirana, I also took advantage to go by land to the border with Greece and took a ferry into Greece, and it's truly an amazing experience. Thank you very, very much for such inspiration. I wish you all the best in New York, inspiring other people, and all the best in this third term.
Thank you, Gil, and thanks to everyone. And I look very forward to hosting you. Gil has my number, so WhatsApp me or text me, and then I'll be happy to be host.
And please, everybody, get that video of the presentation and share it with your friends, with colleagues, with staff, with elected officials. Thank you. Take care.